Hey there, everyone. We're going to talk today about making homemade bacon. First thing you want to do is source your pork belly. Here in Northern Virginia, where I live, I was able to find pork belly fairly easily. The local source around here was going to charge me as much as $9 a pound. And I asked them why they were going to charge me so much, because that was what they charge for their own bacon. And they told me that they were charging $9 a pound for fresh raw pork belly because that's what they would get for it if they had made bacon out of it. Well, I couldn't believe that, but that was true. That's what they said. So I did a little bit more searching around, and I was able to find a place that sells it at $3.50 a pound. I picked up a couple of the bellies, and you see them in the picture here. One was 7 pounds 4 ounces, and another one was 7 pounds 14 ounces. I put one in the freezer and cured the one that's 7 pounds and 14 ounces for this video. Here I unwrapped it and cut it in half. This way it's going to fit a little bit easier on my smoker when I get to that step. And here you can see the cross section of it, and you can see that it looks a lot like bacon. Now if you look carefully at the slab there, that cross section, you'll see that the rind, the skin, is still on that. The first thing I do is remove that skin before I proceed any further. You're going to need a good boning knife or a fillet knife to do this. One with a rounded tip on it makes it particularly easy to remove. And with some finesse, this is what you'll end up with. In this case, I removed a little more than a pound of skin from this 7 pound 14 ounce slab. Now some people like to leave the skin on throughout the process and even end up frying their bacon with the skin on. I don't really like that, although I love the skin. Not on my bacon. It's a little bit too hard, and the cure penetrates the meat much better than with the skin on. And speaking of cures, let's move on to discussing that a little bit. I prefer a dry cure over a wet cure, and I don't mind using nitrites in my bacon. I just don't eat enough of it to really worry about whether or not nitrites are going to have any long-term effect. I just don't get enough of it in my diet, so I'm not worried about it. In my opinion, you really need the nitrite in the cure to obtain the classic and distinctive flavor and texture and color of bacon. Without it, you've got something that's really good and really delicious, except that in my mind, in my opinion, it's not really bacon. What you have are salted strips of roasted pork. Again, that's great, but in my opinion, it's not really bacon. It's up to you. Really though, the single most important reason for using sodium nitrite is because sodium nitrite is very effective in combating one of the most potent poisons known to man, and that's the botulinum toxin. So I use nitrites, and I won't have to worry about botulism. My cure recipe is maple and brown sugar. I use, and here's my recipe, 1 tablespoon of Morton Tender Quick, which is primarily made of salt, and a small amount of sodium nitrite, 1 tablespoon per pound. All of these ingredients, in fact, are per pound. 1 tablespoon of brown sugar. I use a half a teaspoon of fenugreek seeds. This works very well with cures using maple syrup and maple sugar. The fenugreek is even somewhat mapley in its flavor. I also use a teaspoon of granulated garlic per pound of meat, that is. I use about a half a crushed bay leaf per pound of meat, and also about a half teaspoon, of course, ground black pepper during the cure. Immediately before smoking, you may want to add some more black pepper directly to the surface of the bacon. That's up to you. We'll talk about that later. So now let's talk about the curing process. What I do again is I cut the belly in half so that it fits nicely in this 2.5 gallon hefty Ziploc plastic bag. I laid on a half baking sheet and I put it in the refrigerator for 7 days. You want to make sure that the environment for these 7 days is between 36 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit, and the temperature should be within in that range, because over 40 degrees and you may allow bacteria to grow, while under 36 degrees can inhibit the sodium nitrite reaction. So leave your bacon into the refrigerator for 1 week, and flip it over each day at least once. If you want to flip it over twice, flip it over twice. Whatever you want to do, just make sure that it gets flipped over and the cure gets evenly distributed around the meat at least once every 24 hours. After 7 days, this is what it looks like. You'll see that the color of the meat has changed a good bit. So remove the belly from the cure, and you'll want to wash it thoroughly, even letting it soak for a few minutes in some fresh water in a freshwater bath to remove the excess salt and stuff on the surface. Some people recommend repeated washings and soakings over several hours. I find that usually those are the people that are not using nitrites and just using salt, and I imagine they're doing that because an all salt cure is probably going to be leave the meat much more salty than it does when I use Morton's Tender Quick. Using Tender Quick, I find that it only takes a few minutes of washing, and that's more than enough. I do not find the bacon overly salty in the least after using Tender Quick. Once I've got it rinsed off, I'll pat it dry and put it on a rack and put it right back where I had it for the last week in the refrigerator. And I'll leave it there for anywhere for 2 or 3 hours to overnight, depending on my schedule. So the next thing you want to do is prepare your smoker. I prefer to cold smoke bacon instead of hot smoking it, because I prefer the still uncooked final product. It's the more traditional way, and I think the raw bacon turns out a slightly better finished product when it's cooked than starting out with a hot smoked bacon, which is basically fully cooked. Without getting into all the aspects of smoking, and there are a lot of them, let's suffice it to say that you can use any hardwood that you want. My personal favorite hardwood is applewood for smoking bacon. To me, applewood, smoke, and bacon are a perfect match. I smoke mine for typically about 5 or 6 hours. It gives a nice intense smoke flavor, but is not particularly overpowering. As you see here, I use my hot smoker to cold smoke this bacon, and I just have a single burner a single electric burner that I place in the bottom of the smoker, and on top of that my cast iron skillet, and then put in my applewood chips directly into the skillet, turn it up on high, and close the lid. And the highest temperature that I encountered on this particular batch here was 124 degrees. That was the smoker temperature. The actual bacon never got more than 85 degrees, according to the temperature probe that I had inserted. So after 5 or 6 hours on the smoke, this is what I've got. And you see it has a nice color to it. Now I'll put this on my electric slicer, but before I do that, I will freeze mine for a few hours, even overnight, before I slice it up. It makes it much easier to cut and slice when it's partially frozen. Even freezing overnight doesn't make it particularly difficult to cut, because there's so little water in the meat after the curing and smoking process. It's not like you're trying to cut through an ice cube. This is not like bacon you will find in the grocery store by any means. Manufacturers love to add water to their bacons and hams and whatever, because it means the price you're paying for their packaged product has been hiked up by the weight of the added water. Remember, you're buying packaged meat by the pound, and that water they're adding is adding weight to the product. So when you make your own bacon, you're removing water, you're not adding it. And that's going to concentrate the flavors, and because there's no added water, you're also going to notice that homemade bacon doesn't pop and spatter and sputter all over the place like store-bought bacon does. Cooked at a low temperature, and that's what you want to do. You want to cook it at a low temperature in your pan or bake it in the oven. It'll stay flat and it won't curl up into funny shapes. This homemade bacon is so much of a far superior product than what you can get in a grocery store, regular store-bought bacon. It's probably the most distinctively better food over the store-bought version than any other homemade food or drink that you can make. So the next morning, here's what I had for breakfast. Scrambled eggs with a little sour cream added, hash brown potatoes sauteed in duck fat, and of course homemade bacon. I assure you, this is something worth trying. So I hope you enjoyed this video and that you found it helpful. Leave me a comment and let me know how your own bacon turned out. And cheers. Bye now.